Good Tuesday, everybody in Gov/Com664. Welcome to, are you ready for this week? Boom, bam, 7. Last week before the last week. You've almost made it. All right. Um, let's get this video started. It being later in the afternoon, I am sufficiently caffeinated, so I'm without coffee. I almost feel, like I'm not properly dressed or something, but we're going to have to make do. Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing this week, talk about week 8, because this semester being an 8-week semester ends on sort of a weirdish schedule. And then we'll look back at week 6 and go through the discussion questions, see what your answers are, and see what you did. Okay, so first things first, let's get to this week, week 7. If you take a look in Canvas in the module, we are looking at, we're sort of continuing. This is like part 2 of media manipulation and fragmentation. So last week, we asked the question, basically, who's driving the bus here? Is it government that drives policy that comes to us, and then the media reports on it, or and from expressions like wag the dog, is it the media that is, in fact, controlling what goes on through framing and gatekeeping? And how does the state respond? Okay. Regulations, attempts to screen what we see and don't see. And do we as a populace have a right to say, yeah, okay, no, we don't want to see that? All right. We're going to continue with that in week 7. So it's called, part 2, specifically fragmentation. This is something that has probably among phenomenon that has come to dominate our media in terms of how things were different. And we're talking over a very short period of time, maybe 20, 30 years. The effects of technology and media on media fragmentation. There is a great book, and I'm looking around to see if I have it close at hand. I don't know what I do. I don't know that I do. But anyway, the title of the book is The Search. And it is about how Google came along and basically broke the business model that was media. The name of the book is The Search: How Google and Its Rivals Rewrote the Rules of Business and Transformed Our Culture. And it's by a guy named John Battelle. That's Battell, John Battelle, who used to work at Wire magazine. And it is in part a history of how Google came to be, which, if you're in a digital marketplace, which you are, and if you're studying communication, which has now been significantly subsumed by digital technology, you should know this story. So it's in part a story of how Google came to be, and then in part a story of how Google came to change the rules of media. And one of the most and I don't think they necessarily saw it coming, but the most impactful changes that came about was that Google, when they created it, was created by a couple of guys at Stanford University. Um, a guy, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and they came up with this technology that allowed people to search what was then a very small World Wide Web. Okay, now understand, this is something else you need to know as someone in communication. There's a difference between internets, and it's not internet, it's internets, because there are multiples of them, and World Wide Web. So the big broad stroke distinctions are internets. This is the hardware, the connecting, whether it's by wire or remote. Okay. The World Wide Web, on the other hand, is the content that's stored on these connected servers. All right. So way back when the content that you found on servers was small, It was really hard to get to. And Brennan Page came up with this program that would go out and find stuff that matched queries. So it was like recipe for apple pie. Poof. And it would go out to servers, that is actual physical computers all over the world, which were linked together, the ones that you could get to by way of links, and see if there was anything on any of those servers that pertained to apple pie, or recipes for apple pie, or making apple pie, or eating apple pie, or serving apple pie, or whatever. And then it would rank order them and give them back to you. Brilliant stuff. But the question was, how do you make any money with this? Because people were already used to free searches. There were phone books where you just picked it up and and the telephone companies gave the phone books away. You didn't have to buy them. Or you could just dial 0 on your phone and get an operator, which also acted as information. Say, hey, operator, can you give me the address of, or can you give me the phone number for da 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 da? So the model was, people had this expectation that it was free, so they weren't going to pay Google per each time they searched. And Google knew, this new company knew, that if that was the model, not only one, no people of any number would do it, but two, there would be a natural bottleneck, because you're not going to just keep handing out money to do searches all day long. You go, how much have I spent today on it? How many searches did I do? Okay, like 3, 4. Okay, that's enough. I'm not looking for any more stuff. That's not what they wanted. They wanted people using the program as many times throughout the day as they could. So they hit on an idea. They said, what if we have companies, individuals, organizations that want to be found pay us to advertise? And unlike the newspaper, which was the standard format for peoples and organizations and companies that wanted to be found, you put an ad in the newspaper. Unlike the newspaper, we, with this new technology, could tell those who are paying us exactly how many people saw their ad, how many people clicked on their ad, actually went to the ad. And then of those people, how many people showed up to either the store or the website and took an, did an action item, and it's called in business action item. That could be the purchase of something, the contracting of services, or whatever. And we could give them a formula. This many people see, this many people interact, typically comes out to this many people that buy. And then we only charge them for how many times it's seen, how many times it's clicked on, how many times somebody buys something. We can charge them much lower rates than newspapers charge them, but they'll have a much higher level of confidence that those who see the ad, interact with the ad, and then go to the store are actually there. Because in the old model, in the newspaper, you paid for space in the newspaper, and you really had no way of knowing who saw it. For people that read the paper, maybe they just went right past the section where your ad was. Maybe they saw it and they're like, yeah, so what? And they didn't do anything. How did you know when they showed up in your store or called up your service that they saw you in the paper, unless they asked you? Maybe they didn't even see you at all. Maybe that section from the paper, or even the whole paper, has just been lying around, and they line the cat box with it. Google said, okay, well, we can charge pennies for advertising, but the return for the advertiser is going to be so efficient that we'll make up for the low amount that we charge with the volume of advertisers that we'll gain. That was their plan, and this is laid out, how it is they came to that, and so some of the early stops and starts in the book, The Search, by John Battelle, and that's Battell. And it was a gamble that they took, and it was a gamble that worked. They started making a lot of money through charging companies to be found. But what it did, and what they didn't see coming, was it created a habit within the public of fragmentation. Right now, I mean, people have always divided into like groups and done like things according to like groups. Okay. But not like this. I mean, it's fragmented even the fragmentary parts. And so now we're in a situation in which the technology, both in terms of the design of the device and the software that runs it, has reached a level where it's moved past um, just understanding that you belong to a certain group and there's going to be some fragmentation to only showing you material that through a lot of data accumulated, advertisers have been told, because Google keeps the data, that this is what you want to see. Now you might be saying, okay, so what's wrong with that? I don't want to be shown stuff I don't want to see. Well, that's fine if what you're talking about is buying groceries and clothes and products for a pet, because maybe, for instance, you don't even have a pet. So maybe you don't want to see anything about cat food or cat litter. Great. But when it comes to news, information, politics, this becomes a little more problematic, because it becomes very difficult to function on local levels as a democracy, and then on national levels as a republic, when only segmented portions of the population see segmented things, and this segment doesn't even see what this segment is seeing. And so it makes dialogue, compromise, um, finding common cause and moving forward increasingly difficult. So back to this triangulation where government's up here and people and media are here. The change in the nature of the media has changed how the government has functioned, because they know that down here amongst the people, we're in these fragmented groups. We're not talking to each other like we used to. And so this changes how it is that people seek office, hold office, make policy, present information about policy. There's this massive downstream effect. Right? That's what we're going to finish with this week. Okay. Also, for this week, you have your fourth and final film review. And now it's not due in this week, but you need to be at it this week because it's due on July 2nd. And this is what I told you, this class ends on sort of a weird schedule. The class ends on Saturday, July 4th. Strange. So, what that means is I really need to have everything in and ready to grade by July 3rd. So I'm putting the fourth film review due on July 2nd, which is a week and 2 days from now. So take some time this weekend to watch it and write it up. I have yet to get to grading your third film review because it was just due yesterday on the 22nd, but I'll do that this week and give you some more feedback. All right. So in case you're wondering, how is it that I do this, and if you have any questions, look back at reviews 1 and 2, and then if you have any questions, reach out to me during my office hours. Okay. All right. Let's take a quick look at your answers from last week and see what we can glean for them. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing. So we do have a final exam, right? It's not up yet because, it's not time yet. But you will take your final exam on Friday the 3rd. If you, I'm not going to give you any readings or any work next week. So I don't know, we could even do it on July the 1st. So I'll tell you what, for those of you that see this video, if you would have a preference, and maybe I'll send it out in an announcement, would you rather take it July the 1st and get it over with? So if you want to take off on July the 3rd and enjoy the, a prolonged July the 4th weekend, you don't have to be worrying about an exam. We could do that too. I just have to have everything in the can and finished by the 3rd of July. Because 4th of July, happy 250th anniversary. We're done. Okay. Let me know. All right, let's take a look at last week, discussion week 6. The questions, see what you said. Okay. And see what we can glean from that. Question number 1, chapter 31 in PIPS discusses the pros and cons of allowing media regulators to move, meaning work, employment, in and out of the media business. That is, those who are in the government side of media regulation, then they go to work in media companies, and those who are media companies go to work in government regulation. Okay. Of the following 2 scenarios discussed in the chapter, which, in your supported opinion, is better for democracy? Now, this, when you see questions like this, and if you see anything like this on the test, this is actually a 2-part question. The first is I am trying to determine if you read the stuff, because I'm not telling you what the 2 scenarios are. Okay. And then I want your opinion. Okay, Charles, let's see what you say. Of the 2 scenarios, no allowance of regulators to work in the media industry, and all or some allow, the best for democracies to prohibit the cyclical movement from regulatory positions to media industry positions to ensure fairness, transparency. The critical question is whether the regulator can be influenced. The preference is to be free of influence of both government and private institutions. Okay, and I think, and I'm not going to tell you which of the 2 you think is best, but that's a good answer. I mean, the arguments that people make for allowing them to work, go both ways, from media into regulation, regulation to media. Well, they know the business. You see, they've been around and they've worked it, so they understand what it's like. Yes. However, they also know the business, but they're also only human, and they're influenced by friends. They're influenced by money. Maybe that they were involved with a practice that they were rewarded for, in which, they go, I don't see that's so much of a problem, but it's not allowed by regulation, and they don't do a good job enforcing the rules. So it's problematic. All right, question number 2. If you were drafting a regulatory policy for broadcast media, discuss how you would balance the need for media to be competitive with the public's desire to be protected from content that it deems offensive. Now, in some countries like England, they don't seem to bother with this. That is, they just say, okay, here's the policy, and this is where we're going to prohibit this. Just because. That's not how we do things here. All right, we try to strike a balance. I mean, it's true that there's some pretty objectionable stuff. I mean, the site 4chan comes to mind. If you don't know what that is, you're probably better off. I mean, it's almost like you slipped on the street of what is normalcy in the World Wide Web and suddenly fell down a manhole into the sewer. And it's a pretty vile place. But because of how we approach information, it's largely unregulated, right? Well, what did you say? Kristen, in drafting a regulatory policy for broadcast media, I would strive to balance media competitiveness with public distaste for offensive content by establishing a system of accountability, standards of nonpartisan reporting across broadcast channels, and broad availability of offering coverages to audience. One way to strike this balance is platform-dependent regulations, because certain broadcasters draw certain audiences, facilitating standards to address specific content concerns according to the average of the audience. That's interesting. Of a platform would allow for media sources to compete for their audience attention without causing offense to broadcast audiences. Okay, that is an interesting perspective. I think, it might exacerbate the problem of audience fragmentation, but that's an interesting way to go about it. Okay, fair enough. Good answer, Kristen. Number 3, from chapter 34, PIPS, discuss how the United States government managed media coverage of one of the following conflicts. And I give you, and I wanted this in the past, so I'll give you 3: the Civil War, World War I, the Korean War, and the First Gulf War. In your supported opinion, did the U.S. government manage the media during the conflict, that is, okay, in a way that was good for our democracy? Okay, because, the question is, should media just have open access to conflict? And because, I mean, sometimes war means you have to do things that are unpleasant to see. And do you want that being just openly reported if you have to win the war? Okay, Jennifer. During the first Gulf War, I was stationed in Guam from 1989 to 1991. I recall passing a communal room where CNN was broadcasting live updates 24/7 from the battlefield. Most of my life up to that point, I had relied on the basic three networks to receive the news, watching. And then, by the way, for any of you that doesn't know that, wasn't alive when, say, Jennifer and I were alive, that before the advent of cable and certainly before the advent of internet-based World Wide Web found platforms like YouTube, there were three, four-ish channels: NBC, ABC, CBS, and PBS, and that was it. All right. And then CNN came as a non-broadcast channel, as a cable channel, and boom, there were all kinds of channels like it, the imitators, and now they're all over the place. Okay. So Desert Shield and Desert Storm coverage marked a pivotal shift for CNN and journalism itself. Okay, the U.S. government deliberately managed the media during the Gulf War. They coordinated media access, controlling information that reporters could share about Desert Shield and Desert Storm. As Grabber noted, the government took almost complete control of the war news supply. To answer the question, no, I do not think how the government handled the media was good for democracy. In the end of the day, the media filed a complaint against the Department of Defense, heavily controlling what media reported, who the media spoke with, and what access they had. This event serves as another example of the amount of distrust on both sides that can grow and fester from these events. For me personally, I've escorted media on submarines, aircraft carriers, on bases and war zones. There's always a struggle because the media and the government always have different objectives. Okay, good answer. And I, I'm not going to tell you where to land on this, because on the one hand, good for democracy means the survival of the body politic of democracy. And if you're engaged in a war in which that's at stake, in which not so much World War I or the Gulf War, but World War II. I mean, we know from captured documents following the war that Germany was already developing plans to invade the United States. Now, would they pulled it off? Would it have been successful? Hypothetical. But nonetheless, there was a clear and present danger to the integrity, to the survival of the state. So when you have that, threat, that's a threat to democracy. But on the other hand, when you have secrecy, when you have filters, when you have sanitation, this can lead to an attitude towards war that is, oh, well, it only happens over there, and it only happens on the screen. It only happens digitally in a far out place, and we just push a button and a missile goes up, and then it comes down, and the enemies aren't there anymore, which is not the reality of war. So good answer, Jennifer. Okay. According to Mannheim, who controls the press? You agree or disagree? How, according to Mannheim, is this control exercised? Okay, now this is another one that assumes that you read it. Okay. Nakisha. According to Mannheim, the money makers control the press. This is the politicians, business owners, the individuals who have the most money. They control the press through, I think you mean they, through campaigns, social media, and providing needed information to news outlets. In my opinion, this is horrible for our democracy. This is unfair to the public. We are being led and given what these individuals want us to know. This prevents us from being able to make our own fair opinions on issues and topics. And I think that's fundamentally true. Now, for those of you in terms of the film reviews, if you reviewed the film Good Night and Good Luck, you know that this is not just a recent problem. One of the themes of the film is balancing the commercial interests that CBS as a network had against the content of programs that those creating it, like Edward R. Murrow, knew the public needed to hear. That is the content, especially during the McCarthy era in which people's lives were being wrecked. And in the film, Edward R. Murrow's like going, "Whoa, time out! We should, as the institution mentioned in the First Amendment to the Constitution, we have a duty to make sure that this stuff doesn't go on. We got to report on it." But then the executives at CBS are going, but our sponsors, they're they're not quite as enthused as you are. And so maybe we don't report on it so much. And then in the end, as the film goes, you don't report on it at all. So that is a problem. A good answer. According to Gate, how is the internet challenging organizational expertise? In your supported opinion, is this good for democracy? A lot of you answered this question. In fact, there's a phenomenon now online. It's called the rise of the non-expert expert. That is people who have expertise just because they're talking about it. But let's see what you said. Let's see who answered this question that we haven't selected already. I think we've heard from everybody, so we're just going to have to go back to the well. Okay. Nikisha, since we had you last, let's just do you again. The internet is preventing the news from providing information they felt was relevant and that the public needed to know. Now we can hear and see what any person feels, is found, and wants to report. I feel this trend is wonderful for democracy. We're not being fed lies by the news who used to gatekeep information. Now we're giving information. Given information vastly, it's up to the public to fact check the information, unfortunately. And when I read that, I thought, okay, when you say unfortunately, meaning that the public just doesn't fact check, or it's unfortunate that we have this, it's a it's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it cuts through a lot of the gatekeepers. On the other hand, it shifts the responsibility to the consumer, which, by the way, the problem, and it's a good answer. The problem here is that we have moved away from a consumer responsible view of the world in terms of our legal system to a producer responsible view. So it used to be that if you, I don't know, stuck your foot under the lawnmower, whether on purpose or by accident, and your toes got mowed off, that was pretty much on you, because any knucklehead could figure out when you have a large, rapidly spinning and sharp blade somewhere, you don't put your digits near it. Okay, but the law changed. The law changed slowly. There's some watershed moments, where things went, but through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and it changed from a let the consumer beware, it was the responsibility was on you, to let the seller beware. Now, why did it do that? Well, because the assumption was that technology is progressing so quickly that the average consumer just couldn't keep up. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that premise, but that was the reason given. I mean, I think the real reason given is that it's much more convenient for lawyers to extract large sums of money from corporations by bringing lawsuits against them on behalf of their clients, than it is, to say, oh, oops, the client's fault. So, if you stick a hot cup of coffee from McDonald's between your legs and then drive off and you get burned, that's the fast food place's fault. I'm still not sure how that worked, but it did. Okay, that's how our legal system has gone. The responsibility is on the producer. Jump over to the internet and information and the harm that can be caused from misinformation. Whether it's a TikTok trend, what, eating Tide Pods or something, okay, to perspectives on politics. Nope. Thus far, it has been entirely on us. It's all up to you, and there have not been corporations held responsible. It'll be interesting to see if that tension is maintained, or how it settles out. Okay. Question 6. During the height of its power, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria published a monthly magazine called Dabiq, and I give you the link to the wiki page, filled with explicit, grotesque images of war, torture, and terror. ISIS's stated purpose in the publishing was, in part, to terrify various groups, Christians and Jews, and Western governments. Question: should the U.S. government seek to block publications like Dabiq, even if doing so means carrying out cyber attacks on countries, in this case like Saudi Arabia, hosting them? And I said, you really don't, if you don't want to, you don't have to go looking for this magazine. I don't know that there are any full versions left. I think most of them have been scrubbed. But when they were out there, I mean, this was some pretty rough stuff in that magazine. Okay, Jennifer. Well, First Amendment protects free speech. Organizations that knowingly support foreign terrorist organizations must face constraints on those, right? Case in point, 2020, U.S. Department of Justice released a press statement on their global distribution campaign against cyber-enabled terror. Terror finance highlights ongoing adoption by enemy groups using modern platforms. This is from the Department of Justice, 2020. United States government can decide whether to conduct cyber attack against the assets of a known foreign terrorist organization. Most citizens may not be aware of the threats posed by publications like Dabiq. As Gravier and others notes, during crisis, Americans often support limiting civil liberties, including First Amendment rights, due to perceived threats. Additionally, Gravier explains that major world wars and events that challenge worldwide status quo belong in a category of extreme danger that generates a call for suspension or dilution of constitutional guarantees. Fast forward to modern day terrorism. After 9/11, Congress revised what constitutes material support for terrorism, including expert advice or assistance. Okay, in its definition, this expanded the scope of prohibited. You wrote it fine. I'm just reading it badly. This expanded the scope of support prohibited from foreign terrorist organizations by the U.S. government. So take them down. Okay, fair enough answer. I mean, while it was publishing it, I mean, it was so grotesque and so violent and so vile that, I mean, just even on the grounds of we call it porn. I thought it not in the sense of illicit sexual images, but of just the I mean, it's of the same essence. The problem with pornographic material is it reduces the view of the total person to a singular feature or function, which is exploitive. That is, to reduce someone to a singular image or function is to exploit, and for financial gain, is to exploit the image of the individual and the individual through the image. The same is done when you're talking about extreme violence. And I'll be very honest with you. When someone says, "Oh, did you see that video of such and such getting taken down?" Or, I think there was recently a shooting in Montreal where an officer mistakenly shot a bystander. "Oh, do you see that when the officers were shot?" They're like, "No." "Well, you want me to send you the video?" "No, I really don't." All right. So in this extreme case, even free speech issues aside, putting them aside, I think that there's a case made for taking this stuff down. Good answer, Jennifer. Okay, everybody. Keep on and keep it on. You got 1 week left. Exam. Let me know. If you'd like it on the 1st of July, we can put it up. If the 3rd, give you a little extra time to study, we can put it up. Okay. Remember, the best way, I think I've said this in the past, to study for this exam, go back and review the discussion questions. All of them, not just the ones that you answered, because the exam questions will be drawn right out of those discussion questions. And if you're conversant with those, you're going to be okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so very much for great work this semester. I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you, especially some of you that's let me know you're having some difficult times. And I will send you either an announcement or a video next week. So until then, I will see you on Canvas. God bless. Bye-bye.